Okay, so let's be honest. When things just don't add up, right? Like when those promises, they don't match what you see happening around you. It's like, time to start digging. And in Stellenbosch lately, there's definitely that feeling like something's off, especially with how things are, well, managed, I guess you could say. We're not even talking about like little slip-ups here. We're talking full-on budget reports that just make you raise an eyebrow. You've got project timelines that seem to just go on forever, and development plans gathering dust on some shelf somewhere.
It's more than just frustrating, though, right? These documents, the ones that are supposed to be all transparent and clear about how the municipality is doing, they're the ones raising even more questions.
Yeah, totally. Like, why even bother with them then?
Yeah.
But that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We've actually gone through all the stuff that's publicly available, the financial statements, those performance reports, even meeting minutes, all to get a real, unfiltered look at what's happening with your municipality.
No sugarcoating here.
Exactly. Our mission today is pretty simple. We're shining a light on where things might be going wrong financially, connecting the dots so it makes sense for you, the listener, and honestly, we're here to demand some accountability. Someone has to.
Absolutely. And what's really worrisome is these documents, the ones meant to show everything clearly, they actually raise more questions than they answer. Black and white figures showing big differences from what was planned. And when you start piecing it all together, yeah, a pretty disturbing picture starts to emerge.
It's not even just about the numbers themselves. It's about what it all means for the services you use every single day. You know, the stuff that actually matters.
Right.
So we've gone through the kind of documents most people wouldn't even want to touch, you know, the audited annual financial statements, annual performance reports, even draft development plans. Like, who even reads those things? Oh, and even agendas from those council meetings, you know, the very records that are supposed to show everything clearly. We did it all for you.
And when you open those books, which is exactly what we've done, some things immediately stand out, big red flags waving. Take the audited annual financial statements, the ones for the year ending June 2024. There's a category there under operational expenditure. It's just labeled other, and it shows 123% favorable variance.
Okay, so at first, saving money sounds good.
Right.
And
But when the variance is this big and it's in some random category, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where were they actually cutting back? Did they compromise essential services? Did they slash maintenance budgets? It's not necessarily a good thing. Could be they just failed to invest where it really matters.
Exactly. And this supposed saving in one place, it really stands out when you see the failures in other areas. We looked at payables from non-exchange transactions, basically money that comes from other levels of government, you know, allocated for specific purposes. And guess what? We saw huge negative variances. Like in one case with the provincial government, Western Cape allocations, a negative variance of over 11 million rand. That's 11 million rand that was given to them, but they apparently didn't even spend it. So they're skimping in this vague other category, but not using the money meant to help you.
Doesn't inspire much confidence, does it?
Not really. Like, what does that tell us about their ability to actually do what they planned? Makes you think.
It gets even worse when you look at conditional grants. Those are the ones that have specific rules on how they're supposed to be spent, right? The Human Settlements Development Grant shows a massive positive variance, which basically means they spent way less than they were supposed to. We're talking about a negative variance of over 20 million rand, money meant for housing development. And the fact that so much was left unspent really makes you worry about the progress of housing projects in Stellenbosch.
Are these projects just stalled? Are
Yeah.
people just waiting for homes while millions of rand sit there unused? Not a good look.
No, not at all.
And it's not even just these big financial categories either. Even when you zoom in on specific projects, the picture doesn't get any prettier. Take the landfill site rehabilitation, for example. The financial statements, they have this note saying they can't even properly estimate the costs of managing the site after it's closed down. Why? Because the regional director hasn't decided on a timeline yet. It's like, come on, you're running a landfill, but you have no plan for what happens after. What about the financial burden that comes with it?
Right. This isn't just a small oversight. It's a huge financial risk. You, the taxpayer, could end up stuck with a massive bill later on.
Exactly. And this whole lack of planning thing seems to be a trend here. We looked at the annual performance report for 2023-24. That's the one that's supposed to show how the municipality is doing against its own goals, right? And guess what? Same story. Fail, fail, fail. One of their key performance indicators was to submit a revised wastewater master plan. Their goal, one plan. How many did they submit? 0.
It's basic infrastructure planning, something that affects everyone's health and safety. And they completely dropped the ball.
totally dropped it. What are they even doing? Are we going to see environmental problems because of this? What about those essential wastewater treatment facilities? Will those be neglected too? So many questions.
Yeah, and it's not even just about missing targets. Even when they say they've achieved something, the reality is often completely different. Like, take the submission of the revised Comprehensive Integrated Transport Plan, they call it the CITP, for 2023-2028. They checked the box, said target achieved. But when you actually look at the draft CITP report itself, the one with all the feedback from stakeholders back in March 2023, it paints a pretty bleak picture of how transport actually works here.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, they talk about a system that's just a mess. Poor integration between different ways to travel, limited access for residents, services only during peak hours, no real benefit to using public transport in terms of saving time, not enough infrastructure, and a rail service that's completely broken.
So basically, they submitted a revised plan, but they ignored all the real problems people face every day. A revision in name only, like you said.
Exactly. And what's even more frustrating is that draft report actually points out specific bottlenecks, the ones that directly affect your commute. The R304 entrance into Stellenbosch and the Bird Street-Adam Toss intersection, the R44, these aren't new problems.
Yeah.
And they're still there in this supposedly revised transport plan.
It's like they're not even trying.
Right. It makes you wonder if these improvements are actually happening or if they're just stuck in planning forever while everyone sits in traffic.
And let's not forget about safety. The draft CITP report also mentions a CCTV implementation safety initiative. They've got this 5-year plan, and for the first year, ending in 2023-24, their goal was to install just one security camera. You'd think that would be easy, right?
You'd think so.
But guess what? In the draft annual report, there's nothing. No performance rating for this goal. It's like it never happened.
Or maybe they just don't want to admit they couldn't even install one camera. Really says a lot about how committed they are to safety.
Now, let's talk about the ATC development guidelines stuff. This is the big vision for the Adam Task Corridor, a huge area for future development in Stellenbosch. They really push this idea of lively, pedestrian-friendly streets in these guidelines. You know, active ground floors, shops, restaurants, cafes, places where people want to hang out.
They paint a pretty picture, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
But here's the big question for you, the listener. When you walk through the areas where this Adam Task Corridor is supposed to be, does it match what they're describing? Are there bustling streets? Or are there just empty storefronts? It doesn't feel like the vibrant place they promised. Why aren't they enforcing these guidelines? Where's all the investment they talked about?
What's really interesting is the guidelines even go into detail about what each part of the Adam Task Corridor should be like. Precinct 6, it's supposed to blend in those historic structures, preserving the heritage of the area. And Precinct 7, that's meant to be the welcoming entrance, with a mix of residential and commercial stuff.
Again, it makes you wonder, is the development actually following this plan? Are there delays, changes? Because that undermines the whole purpose of these guidelines.
It really does. It points to a lack of oversight and accountability. They're not making sure the development aligns with their own goals.
Now, let's get to the juicy stuff. Transparency. We got our hands on the agenda for a mayoral committee meeting for March 2025. Conveniently, it also includes minutes from February 2025. And there's this one item under return item that really caught our eye. It's about getting rid of the Transvalia Complex through a 30-year lease agreement. They even have a preferred bidder already. But get this, the details of this huge deal, distributed under separate cover.
Seriously, separate cover. For a 30-year lease of a municipal asset, what are they trying to hide? This is the opposite of transparent.
Totally. It just makes people suspicious. It destroys public trust.
And this whole secrecy thing goes against everything the municipality says about being transparent and accountable. In that same agenda, they brag about their communication platforms, their website, their social media, like it's proof they're open. But how can they say that when they're hiding the details of a major deal like this?
Right. It makes you wonder who's actually benefiting from this arrangement and what does it mean for the municipality and its residents in the long run. Not a good look.
And it's not just about shady deals either, that mayoral committee agenda. It also shows some really troubling staffing issues in important service areas, like the chief traffic services position. Vacant. Not exactly reassuring for anyone's safety on the roads.
Not at all.
But here's the kicker. The traffic law enforcement services had a 100% vacancy rate. That means no traffic officers at all. How can they enforce any traffic laws? How can they make sure the roads are safe?
It's mind-boggling. This isn't just being inefficient. This is like completely neglecting their duty. They're putting every single resident at risk.
Absolutely. And when you think about all these failures in basic service delivery, It makes those proposed tariff increases even harder to swallow. We're talking about the ones outlined in, get ready for it, the Appendix 3 Final Tariff Proposals 2024-2025 Residents and Businesses. Get ready to potentially pay more for electricity, water, refuse removal, fire services, even planning applications.
Like, how can they justify these increases when they're failing to provide basic services, when they're potentially mismanaging public funds? It's like they're asking you to pay more for less.
Exactly.
Let's look at some of these proposed increases, just so everyone's clear. The high season peak electricity tariff, the one for bigger users, it's supposed to jump from 497.19 Rand to 560.43 Rand per kilowatt hour. Even the normal rate is going up from 150.63 Rand to 169.80 Rand.
That's a lot.
Right. And it's not just electricity. Water tariffs are going up too for all those different consumption levels. And get this, taking out your trash. If you have an extra 240-liter bin,
These increases are going to hit people hard.
And it's not even just the direct service costs, even the fees for things like land use applications, subdivisions, rezoning, those are going up too. And it's all in that Stellenbosch Municipal Land Use Bylaw PDF, if you're brave enough to read it. If development projects are already facing delays and the municipality is underspending on infrastructure, are these fees even helping? Or are they just another way for them to make money while the system struggles to function?
It's like they're punishing residents and developers for their own mistakes. It's just not right.
And it all comes back to accountability, doesn't it? Especially when you look at the performance agreements for those bigwigs at the municipality, like the Director of Infrastructure Services and the Director of Planning and Economic Development.
Okay.
Those agreements lay out what they're supposed to be good at, things like strategic direction, managing finances, communicating effectively, and focusing on results.
Big words, big promises.
Right. But when you look at what's actually happening, the underspending, the delays in crucial projects, the secrecy around that Transvalia Complex deal, the empty traffic enforcement department, how does any of this match up with what's expected of them? There's a huge gap between what they say they'll do and what they actually deliver.
A huge gap. And to really drive home how bad the mismanagement is, we need to look at the mid-year budget adjustments from January 2025. These often show where things went wrong with the initial planning or where they suddenly changed priorities. We see a lot of capital expenditure being pushed back, rolled over to later dates. Like for the water telemetry upgrade, that's 1.25 million Rand just sitting there. And the extension to WWTW Stellenbosch, over 437,000 Rand delayed. These roll forwards mean these projects were delayed, and the money allocated for them just couldn't be spent on time. Why are these essential water and wastewater upgrades taking so long? What does it mean for the services you rely on?
And then there are the reallocations of funds. Like the Dorp Street bulk sewer upgrade had its budget cut by 500,000 Rand. Where did that money go? What happens now that this project has less funding? Plus, there are requests for more money for operational expenses, like over 310,000 Rand for transport asset maintenance and 200,000 Rand for outsourcing driver's license cards. This either means they didn't budget properly in the first place, or they're dealing with unexpected costs because they didn't plan well. It just shows how much financial mismanagement is happening at the municipality.
Every corner you turn, there's another problem.
Right.
This is really the foundation of understanding the municipality's finances.
Right.
And one thing that jumps out right away is that they had to restate their accumulated surplus.
Okay, when we say restate their surplus, that means they had to correct some previously reported information.
Exactly, yeah. They had to go back and adjust the numbers, and it's not a small adjustment. We're talking over 24 million Rand. Specifically related to transfers to and from their capital replacement reserve.
Okay, so 24 million Rand that wasn't accounted for properly, that definitely raises a red flag. What does that tell us about their financial oversight? Were these just small clerical errors? Or is there something more systemic going on here?
I think the concerning part is when you dig into the notes, you see they had to correct errors in multiple accounts: property, plant, equipment, cash, and so on. With the capital replacement reserve, it was more about disclosure, not necessarily fraud. However, it does point to a weakness in their systems.
Right.
If they're having to make these kinds of corrections, it makes you question the reliability of their financial information in general.
Absolutely. If you can't get the numbers right, then how can you make informed decisions about spending and planning? And, it makes you wonder what else might be lurking beneath the surface.
Precisely.
Were there any other kind of key things that stood out in these financial statements?
Yeah, so irregular expenditure is another area of concern. They reported an opening balance of over 30 million Rand. That's carrying over from previous years, and while they did correct a prior period error, reducing it by almost 2.9 million, it's still a substantial amount that wasn't spent according to regulations.
Okay, so just to be clear, What does irregular expenditure actually mean? Does it mean corruption?
Well, not necessarily. It
Right.
doesn't automatically equate to corruption, but it means that money was spent without following the proper rules and procedures.
Okay.
And that creates an environment where things can slip through the cracks. It raises concerns about their internal controls and their commitment to following the rules.
Yeah.
So even if it's not outright corruption, it's a red flag.
Absolutely. 30 million rand is a significant amount of money, and it's concerning that they haven't been able to address this issue more effectively.
Hmm.
So we see these kind of red flags, the restated surplus, the irregular expenditure, but on the other hand, they report no unauthorized expenditure. Is that a good sign?
Well, it is positive that there's no unauthorized expenditure, which would be spending without any approval whatsoever. That's a serious breach.
Right.
So avoiding that is good. But it doesn't erase those other concerns about financial management.
Right. So it's like, okay, at least you didn't just do this one really bad thing. But there are all these other things that are still problems. So it's not exactly a glowing endorsement.
Exactly. It's one small positive in a sea of concerns.
So the financial foundation seems a bit shaky, to say the least.
Okay.
But let's move on to see how they're actually using the money they have
Sure.
for projects. The draft third review of the fifth generation integrated development plan that gives us some information about their capital budget.
Right.
What can we tell from that about how well they're managing these projects?
Well, when you look at the capital budget, you do see some projects listed with high implementation percentages. For example, the development of IRF 64 Kylemore, showing 90% implementation with the budget of around 171,000 Rand. So that seems like progress. But things get more interesting when we look at the mid-year adjustments budget for 2024-2025.
Right, because that's where you really start to see how the money is being moved around and
Yeah.
what projects are being prioritized or deprioritized.
Exactly. And the headline here is that there's a massive decrease in the overall capital budget, almost 142 million Rand.
Wow.
That's a huge reduction, bringing the adjusted capital budget down to roughly 316 million Rand.
Okay, so 142 million rand reduction mid-year. What does that tell us?
I mean, it's a clear indication that things aren't going according to plan.
Right.
Projects are either being delayed, underspent, or maybe even scrapped altogether. And that has real consequences for the community, right?
These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about roads not being built, facilities not being upgraded, services not being delivered. It affects people's lives.
Exactly.
So let's dive into some specific projects where we saw these adjustments. Were there any that really stood out to you?
Well, the Adam Test Corridor Transport Project.
Okay.
It was initially allocated 1 million Rand from the Capital Replacement Reserve. That's the money they set aside for infrastructure.
Right.
But then they reduced it by 200,000 Rand, saying the reason was they were spending less than budgeted.
Okay, so they underspent on a key transport project.
Yes. And while saving money can be good, a significant underspend like this often indicates delays or a lack of progress in actually implementing the project. So are they really saving money, or are they just not getting the work done?
Right. It raises questions about their ability to execute these projects effectively. So what about other projects?
Well, the Universal Access Implementation Project also saw a reduction in its CRR allocation, 100,000 Rand less, leaving them with an adjusted budget of only 100,000 Rand. And they said they would roll these funds over to the next financial year.
So another project facing delays.
It seems so, yeah. And this one aimed at improving accessibility for everyone. So delays here have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. And it's not encouraging to see these funds being rolled over. It suggests a pattern of delays and difficulty in getting projects off the ground.
Yeah. And then there's the cut to transport planning.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, a whopping 4 million Rand reduction, bringing the adjusted budget down to 6.75 million.
Okay, so they cut the budget for planning transport solutions. But at the same time, they're acknowledging issues like traffic congestion and unreliable public transport.
Exactly. It seems like a contradictory move. How can you address these problems if you're not investing in the planning needed to find solutions?
Those cuts are going to have real-world consequences. And it's not just the capital budget that was adjusted. Operational expenditure also saw some significant changes.
Oh, yes, definitely. The Planning and Economic Development Directorate, for example, got a huge increase in their operational budget, over 15.7 million Rand.
Oh.
While Infrastructure Services, the department responsible for actually doing the work, saw their operational budget slashed by over 35.6 million Rand.
That's a massive swing. What's the logic behind that? Why boost one and cut the other?
It's not entirely clear from the documents. We do see specifics like a significant increase for depreciation and amortization within the municipal manager's office.
Okay.
But the overall shift raises questions about their priorities and whether they're allocating resources effectively.
So it seems like we're seeing a pattern of these mid-year budget adjustments, which makes you wonder how accurate their initial budgeting process is.
It does, yeah.
So let's look beyond just the budget numbers
Sure.
and look at some more specific examples of project execution. The draft second review of the 5th Generation Integrated Development Plan. That includes a section on ward priorities. Does that give us any insights into how well projects are being managed on the ground?
It does. For instance, in Ward 7, resurfacing a number of streets was listed as a priority, and an assessment was done, which is a good first step. But the project status for 2023-24 is just marked as project in progress, with a little frowny face symbol next to it.
So in progress with a frowny face, that's not exactly reassuring.
No, it suggests that despite the assessment, the actual resurfacing work hasn't been completed as expected. So people are still waiting for these improvements.
Right. They're living with these poor road conditions, even though it was identified as a priority. So are there other examples like this in other wards?
Yeah, in the Riverside and Klein-Moywater informal settlements, they identified a need to install and upgrade ablution facilities. A pretty basic and vital service.
Absolutely.
But the performance rating for this project is completely missing.
Wow.
No information on whether they're on track or not.
So a lack of transparency about whether this crucial project is actually delivering for the community.
Exactly. And that's worrying.
Especially for vulnerable communities that rely on these services. And then there's the issue with the CCTV cameras in Ward 10.
Oh, right. Yes.
Delays there.
Yeah. They wanted to install additional CCTV cameras to improve safety, but the tender process was delayed.
So bureaucratic hurdles getting in the way of a project that could have a real impact on people's sense of security.
Exactly.
And sometimes it seems like they're passing the buck to other entities, which can also cause delays.
Yeah, like in Ward 10. They identified a need for a satellite police station using a building at the community market, but they say it's a provincial function.
So not their responsibility.
Right, so even though they acknowledge the need, they're not taking ownership of finding a solution.
So it seems like a bit of a blame game going on.
Yeah.
So we've looked at the budget, we've looked at some specific ward priorities, but what about the bigger picture? Stellenbosch has these planning documents that lay out a vision for the future. How does that vision line up with the financial realities we've been discussing?
Right, so these documents, like the ATC development guidelines, are actually quite impressive in some ways. They talk about green infrastructure, promoting non-motorized transport, preserving heritage.
Okay.
They have detailed frameworks for different precincts, emphasizing sustainability and quality of life.
So it all sounds good on paper.
It does.
But given the budget cuts we've seen, particularly in areas like infrastructure and transport, how realistic is it that they can actually achieve these goals?
That's the big question. Show a clear link between these aspirational goals and the funding allocated to achieve them.
Right. So it's one thing to have a nice vision, but it's another thing to actually put your money where your mouth is. And then we have the Stellenbosch CITP Activity 4 Final Draft 2 report, which specifically focuses on transport planning.
Yeah, that one highlights all sorts of transport problems. Congestion, unreliable public transport, affordability issues.
Right, all these things that people are dealing with on a daily basis. But then we see the cuts to transport planning and the minimal adjustments to specific transport projects. How does that make sense?
It really doesn't. It seems like they're saying one thing and doing another. They acknowledge the problems, but then don't allocate the resources needed to address them.
Right, and it's not just about addressing immediate problems. They have these long-term plans for rail and bus services, but those require sustained investment.
Right, and we're not seeing that commitment reflected in the budget.
So it raises serious doubts about whether they can actually deliver on these ambitious long-term goals.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here: finances, project execution, but let's touch on performance management.
Okay.
We have these performance agreements for senior management.
Right. These are meant to hold them accountable for achieving specific goals and adhering to principles of good governance.
Right. So things like good governance and compliance. But when we look at the overall picture, the financial irregularities, the budget adjustments, the project delays, does it seem like they're actually meeting those good governance targets?
Based on the evidence in these documents, I'd say there's a real disconnect.
Right.
Between the rhetoric of good governance and the reality of how they're managing things.
So it seems like accountability is lacking, and ultimately it's the residents of Stellenbosch who pay the price.
Exactly.
Finally, let's talk about the Integrated Development Plan, the IDP. It's supposed to be the municipality's big strategic plan, their roadmap for the future. The draft second review of the fifth generation IDP, the one for 2022-2027, it talks about all these fancy principles, democratic leadership, effective administration, citizen engagement. But after everything we've seen today, the lack of progress, the secrecy, the potential misuse of your money, you have to wonder if this whole integrated approach even works. It seems like a bunch of empty promises.
Yeah, it's more aspirational than actual, isn't it?
Totally. The IDP also talks about strategies for improving transport and developing public transport. But then you remember the CITP with all its findings about poor integration, limited access, unreliable services, and you realize the strategies in the IDP and the reality for residents are worlds apart. Plus, when you look at specific ward priorities in the IDP and compare them to the lack of progress in other documents, it's obvious that many local needs are being ignored. They're not turning their fancy plans into actual improvements for you.
All talk, no action, as they say.
Exactly. So let's cut to the chase. What did we actually find in this deep dive? We found big differences between what Stellenbosch Municipality promises and what they actually do. We pointed out those scary budget variances, the unacceptable project delays, and the lack of transparency in those important decisions. All the evidence points to one thing: financial mismanagement and inefficiency. And they can't just ignore it anymore.
And what does this mean for you? The residents and businesses of Stellenbosch. Well, you might be paying more for services that are underfunded or poorly delivered. Important infrastructure projects are just stalled, affecting your daily life and maybe even the future of the whole municipality. And that lack of transparency, it just makes it harder to trust them and hold them accountable.
And when essential services like traffic law enforcement just disappear completely, that's a giant red flag. Something is seriously wrong.
It's a cry for help at this point.
It really is. This isn't just about some numbers on a piece of paper. This is about the quality of life in Stellenbosch. It's about your money being wasted, your needs ignored. It's time for the people of Stellenbosch to stand up and demand answers. You deserve an explanation for all these failures, and you deserve real change.
Absolutely. They need to be held accountable for their actions, or rather, their inaction.
Exactly. This deep dive should make everyone think, is Stellenbosch Municipality being run effectively? Is it really working for its residents? Based on everything we've seen, there's real reason to doubt it. What other questions should you be asking your elected officials? What else should we be looking at in these documents? It's time to pay attention, to demand transparency, and to hold those in power accountable. They work for you, after all.
They do. Don't let them forget it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this information empowers you to demand better governance from your local municipality.